Okay, I need to set the scene for you. Imagine you wake up one morning. You did not drink last night. You have not had a single sip of anything, and yet you feel drunk, not metaphorically, chemically. Your blood alcohol is above the legal limit, and it was not there because of anything you chose to put in your body. That is not a hypothetical. That is a documented medical condition. And today, we are going to understand exactly how it works, why it happens, who it happens to, and what it reveals about the ecosystem living inside all of us right now.
And I will be here to make sure we do not all spiral into an existential crisis about our own stomachs.
And I will provide the clinical framework. This is not cause for panic. It is cause for curiosity and appropriate metabolic monitoring.
I love her so much. Welcome to Nwanyi. I am Ada. This is Milo. And that is Luma, our logical unified medical algorithm, who just told us not to panic in the most alarming possible way. Auto-Brewery Syndrome, also called gut fermentation syndrome, is a condition where the gastrointestinal tract produces ethanol internally through fermentation. That is the same process breweries use to make alcohol from grain, except the brewery is your body, and you did not sign up for this.
Clinically, the condition is characterized by an overgrowth of fermentative microorganisms within the gastrointestinal tract, most commonly fungal species such as Saccharomyces cerevisiae, also known as brewer's yeast, and in some cases, Candida species. These organisms metabolize ingested carbohydrates and convert them into ethanol as a byproduct of their fermentation process.
So we are talking about actual yeast, the same thing that makes bread rise and beer ferment, living in someone's gut and doing its job just a little too enthusiastically.
And here is what makes it particularly wild, because the ethanol is produced internally and absorbed directly through the gut wall into the bloodstream. It behaves exactly like alcohol you would drink. It raises your blood alcohol content. It affects your cognition. It impairs coordination. It can make you fail a breathalyzer. Your liver has to process it. Every consequence of drinking alcohol can happen to someone with this condition, even as they have been completely sober.
Importantly, endogenous ethanol production at low levels occurs in all humans as a normal byproduct of microbial metabolism. What distinguishes Auto-Brewery Syndrome is the scale. The overgrowth is significant enough to produce clinically relevant blood alcohol concentrations, sometimes exceeding 0.4%, which is more than 5 times the legal driving limit in most jurisdictions.
5 times. That is not a glass of wine. That is a situation.
Let us actually walk through the biology here, because I think it is genuinely fascinating and also deeply unsettling in the best possible way. You eat carbohydrates, bread, rice, pasta, fruit, sugar in any form. Those carbohydrates travel to your gut. Under normal conditions, your gut bacteria process them, extract energy, produce some byproducts like short-chain fatty acids, and everyone moves on with their lives.
In a gut with significant fungal overgrowth, the fermentative organisms intercept a portion of those carbohydrates before standard metabolic processing occurs. Through glycolysis and fermentation pathways, they convert glucose and fructose into ethanol and carbon dioxide. The ethanol then crosses the intestinal lining, enters the portal circulation, reaches the liver, and is processed as it would be after ingestion of an alcoholic beverage. If the production rate exceeds the liver's capacity to metabolize it, blood alcohol levels rise.
And this can happen meal after meal after meal. Every time there are carbohydrates, there is potential fuel for the fermentation process. The more carbohydrates, often the more pronounced the effect. Some people with this condition have reported feeling drunk, specifically after carbohydrate-heavy meals, which is actually one of the first diagnostic clues physicians look for.
The fermentation also produces other metabolic byproducts, including acetaldehyde, which is itself toxic and is responsible for many of the physiological symptoms associated with alcohol hangover, including nausea, headache, and cognitive impairment. This means individuals may experience not only intoxication symptoms, but also next-day sequelae without having consumed anything.
The hangover without the party. That is genuinely unfair.
So who ends up with a gut that decides to become a craft brewery? Because this does not just happen to anyone at random.
Several risk factors have been identified. Prolonged or repeated antibiotic use is among the most significant. Antibiotics, while targeting pathogenic bacteria, also eliminate beneficial microbial populations that normally compete with and suppress fungal organisms. With that competitive pressure removed, fungi such as Saccharomyces cerevisiae or Candida albicans can proliferate substantially.
This is a really important point. Antibiotics are sometimes absolutely necessary and they save lives, but they also have downstream effects on the gut ecosystem that are not always discussed. And one of those downstream effects, in some people under some conditions, is that fungal populations can gain ground.
And most of us have been on antibiotics multiple times. So this is not some rare esoteric condition that only happens to a handful of people on Earth.
Correct. Additional risk factors include high carbohydrate diets, which provide substrate for fermentation, compromised intestinal barrier integrity, sometimes called leaky gut, which may facilitate ethanol absorption, underlying conditions such as Crohn's disease, diabetes, or obesity, which alter the gut environment, and in some documented cases, short bowel syndrome following surgical intervention.
And there is a lifestyle component too that I think is worth naming directly. Diets that are heavily processed and sugar-forward, chronic stress which affects gut permeability, alcohol use itself which can alter the microbiome in ways that favor certain fungal species. These are not moral judgments. They are biological inputs that shift the conditions inside the gut.
And for some people, the combination of all of those things creates the exact environment where something like this can develop. Not because they did anything reckless, but because biology is complicated and the gut is sensitive.
Now I want to talk about some real documented cases, because I think this is where the condition stops being a science curiosity and starts being a human story. In 2015, a case was reported in the International Journal of Clinical Medicine involving a 61-year-old man who presented to a hospital with bizarre behavior consistent with intoxication. His blood alcohol level was 0.37%. He denied drinking. Medical staff initially did not believe him. It took extensive investigation and controlled monitoring in a clinical setting where he was isolated, given only carbohydrates, and his blood alcohol was measured for the diagnosis to be confirmed. He had Auto-Brewery Syndrome.
He had to prove it in a hospital room, under observation, just to be believed.
There is also the case that got significant media attention. A man in New York who was arrested on a DUI charge. His defense was Auto-Brewery Syndrome. The courts accepted it. He was acquitted because the medical evidence was clear and documented. His attorney brought in expert witnesses, and the science held up.
It is worth noting that the legal acceptance of Auto-Brewery Syndrome as a valid medical defense required not simply claiming the condition existed, but demonstrating it through documented blood alcohol readings, controlled dietary testing, confirmed fungal overgrowth, and supporting clinical literature. The evidentiary threshold was significant.
Meaning, you could not just walk into court and say, "My gut did it." You needed the receipts, which makes sense, but also means that people without access to specialized medical care who experience this condition may have faced consequences they had no language or proof to challenge.
That part hits differently, because misdiagnosis is also a justice issue.
Multiple cases involved years of misdiagnosis. Patients told they were closet drinkers, referred to substance abuse treatment they did not need, relationships damaged because no one believed them. And all the while, their gut was running a fermentation operation that no one had thought to test for. Karen Dubs, a Texas nurse practitioner, was investigated by the Texas State Board of Nursing after colleagues suspected her of drinking on the job. Her blood alcohol tested high on multiple occasions. She was eventually diagnosed with Auto-Brewery Syndrome after years of investigation, and her case was documented in the medical literature. She was one of the patients in a 2019 study published in BMJ Open Gastroenterology by Dr. Fahad Malik and Dr. Jenny Bimji at Richmond University Medical Center. A man in North Carolina was reported in a 2013 case study in the International Journal of Clinical Medicine after presenting with chronic unexplained intoxication. He was placed in a controlled hospital setting and given carbohydrate-rich foods only. His blood alcohol rose to 0.12%. The culprit was Saccharomyces cerevisiae overgrowth. He was treated with antifungal medication and dietary restriction, and his symptoms resolved.
Two different people, same condition, years of not being believed. That is not just a medical story. That is also about who gets taken seriously when they say something is wrong in their body.
I want to zoom out for a second because Auto-Brewery Syndrome is a dramatic example, but it sits inside a much larger story about the gut microbiome and how much it shapes who we are and how we function.
The human gut microbiome is an ecosystem comprising approximately 38 trillion microbial cells, including bacteria, fungi, viruses, and archaea. It interacts with virtually every system in the body: immune function, neurological signaling through the gut-brain axis, hormone metabolism, inflammatory responses, and metabolic processes. The composition of this ecosystem is shaped by genetics, diet, early life exposures, antibiotic history, stress, sleep, and geographic and cultural context.
And that last part matters because the microbiome you develop growing up eating West African fermented foods like ogi or dawa dawa is genuinely different from the microbiome someone develops eating a processed Western diet. Not better or worse, different. And that difference affects your biology in ways we are only beginning to understand.
Which is also why some of these traditional food practices, the fermentation, the whole grains, the diversity of ingredients, were not just cultural preference. There was something protective happening that the people doing it understood in a pre-scientific way.
The microbiome is also dynamic. It can shift relatively quickly in response to what you eat, what medications you take, what your stress levels are, which is both a concerning and a hopeful thing. Concerning because you can destabilize it. Hopeful because you can also cultivate it.
Research into the microbiome continues to expand our understanding of conditions previously considered idiopathic, meaning without known cause. It is plausible that as diagnostic tools improve, other conditions currently labeled as medically unexplained will be traced in part to dysbiosis, which is an imbalance in the microbial community.
So, if someone suspects they might have this, what does the actual path to diagnosis look like?
Diagnosis requires a controlled carbohydrate challenge in a monitored setting. The patient fasts, then consumes a high carbohydrate meal with no alcohol, and blood alcohol levels are measured at intervals over several hours. A rise in blood alcohol without external consumption, combined with confirmed microbial overgrowth for stool culture or upper gastrointestinal sampling, supports the diagnosis. It is important that the testing be conducted in a controlled environment where external alcohol exposure can be ruled out with certainty.
And treatment involves multiple fronts simultaneously.
First, antifungal medication to reduce the overgrowth of fermentative organisms. Second, a low-carbohydrate diet to eliminate the substrate the organisms use for fermentation, thereby reducing ethanol production even while organisms remain present. Third, probiotic and dietary interventions to support restoration of a balanced microbial community that can compete with and suppress the overgrowth long-term. In cases related to antibiotic disruption, identifying and avoiding further disruptions is critical. Some patients also benefit from treatment of underlying conditions such as intestinal permeability.
It is not a quick fix. It is an ecosystem restoration project.
Which, honestly, might be the most accurate thing Milo has said today. Because you cannot just take one pill and be done. You have to think about the whole environment inside your gut and what it needs to come back into balance. I keep coming back to what this condition teaches us, not just about gut fermentation, but about the relationship between what is living inside us and who we are at any given moment.
Because if your gut can get you chemically drunk without your knowledge, what else is it doing that you are attributing to your mood, your energy, your personality?
Right. The research on the gut-brain axis is showing us that the microbiome influences serotonin production, affects anxiety and depression pathways, modulates inflammation that is linked to everything from cognitive fog to chronic pain. We are not separate from our microbiomes. We are in conversation with them constantly.
From a systems perspective, Auto-Brewery Syndrome is a compelling case study in emergent biological phenomena, where the interaction of multiple variables, microbial composition, dietary inputs, intestinal environment, and immune function, produces an outcome that none of those variables would produce alone. The gut is not a passive digestive organ. It is an active, responsive, adaptive system.
An adaptive system that sometimes decides to open a bar inside your body.
We are all just hosting ecosystems in human form.
That is a surprisingly accurate characterization.
We always close with how to begin, because information without direction is just interesting noise. So here is what the research actually supports for protecting and restoring your gut microbiome. First, diversify what you eat. Your gut microbiome thrives on diversity of fiber sources. Different plant foods feed different microbial populations. If your diet is narrow, your microbiome becomes narrow. Aim for variety across vegetables, legumes, whole grains, and fruits throughout the week. Second, include traditional fermented foods. Fermented foods like yogurt with live cultures, kefir, fermented cassava, fermented locust beans, kimchi, sauerkraut, and kombucha introduce live microbial diversity into the gut. These are not fringe wellness products. Many of them are traditional foods that communities around the world have eaten for generations, for good reason.
Third, be intentional about antibiotic use. When antibiotics are medically necessary, they are medically necessary. But unnecessary antibiotic use, such as for viral infections where they have no effect, disrupts the gut ecosystem without therapeutic benefit. Having this conversation with your physician is reasonable and appropriate.
Fourth, manage chronic stress, because chronic stress affects gut permeability and microbial composition in ways that promote dysbiosis. That is not a lifestyle recommendation, it is a biological fact. When your nervous system experiences, your gut experiences too.
Fifth, if you have persistent, unexplained symptoms, especially anything that looks like chronic intoxication, brain fog, recurring fatigue after eating, or unexplained mood shifts, advocate for a full workup. Gut health is often undertested. You are allowed to ask your doctor to look at your microbiome. You are allowed to push for answers.
The gut is foundational. Attending to it is not indulgent. It is clinically rational.
Luma just called self-care clinically rational. And honestly, that is my new mantra.
We are Nwanyi. The mysteries of the human experience are our specialty. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to know their gut is a whole ecosystem. And if you want to go deeper, join the Nwanyi Circle at ezenwanyi.com. We will see you next time.